And I'm so happy to welcome you here this evening. My son, who's 11, says to me that, Mom, I could never work at the Pennsylvania Prison Society because every day you deal with the most depressing information that anybody could talk about, that all you do is talk about depressing things. So thank you for coming out tonight to talk about a really important and really depressing topic. But what I say to my son, and tonight is a perfect example of this, that when you're in a fight to rectify the really horrible things, it's actually incredibly meaningful and fulfilling. And that's what tonight's authors are all about. As many of you know, the Pennsylvania Prison Society is Pennsylvania's independent monitor of prison conditions. So by law, society staff and volunteers go into all 85 county and state facilities licensed by Pennsylvania to help people in custody address issues that they're facing related to conditions, and to report out on what conditions are like, how the billions of dollars that Pennsylvania taxpayers pay for incarceration are being spent. And one of the things that always strikes me in my job at the Prison Society is that we don't actually know how many people die in Pennsylvania prisons and jails every year. We know that tonight there are about 61,000 of our fellow Pennsylvanians confined to one of those 85 facilities. And likely this week, at least one of them is going to die. Already this week, one of them has died. And that may or may not be reported. That may be hidden. One of the things that strikes me is that in this country, we invest more money on tracking Amazon packages than we do to whether our fellow citizens in government custody die and how they die. And tonight's authors are up for changing that. So Roger Mitchell is the former medical examiner for Washington, D.C. and the head of pathology, am I getting that right? Chair of pathology at Howard University.
Oh, you got rid of that.
He's the chair. And Jay Aronson is both a professor at Carnegie Mellon University and also a prison society volunteer going into facilities in Western Pennsylvania to help people in custody. And Josh Vaughn has done the single most in Pennsylvania to report out and do investigative reporting on the deaths that certain jails in Pennsylvania do everything that they can to hide. And so we couldn't have a better group of speakers. And I hope that you leave this conversation the way I leave a good day at the Prison Society, which is knowing that the horizon is bright because we're all together getting there. So, Jake.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, just before I do anything else, Emily, I think, have you explained CLE to the folks who are here for CLE? Okay. Does everyone who's here for CLE understand what they need to do? Awesome. I just wanted to begin by thanking Claire and just the entire Prison Society staff who I work with, both in the capacity of a researcher, a volunteer who goes into Western Pennsylvania prisons. Oh, sorry, and also as someone who tries to get the word out in events like this. Emily, thank you so much for all the amazing work that you've done, and thank you to everyone, Kristen, everyone who's here. I want to name everyone, but I won't do that. And thank you to Industrious for hosting us, and most importantly, thank you so much to all of you. I think post-pandemic, getting people to come out, to leave their houses, and to come to events is so hard, and to see so many of you here today is just amazing. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to make sure that I stayed on task. So just to begin, I wanted to give you a sense of the history of this book and a little bit of my own history. And I'm going to pass the mic to Roger, and he can tell you a little about his background, how he got interested in this topic, and then I think we're just going to kind of riff. I think we're going to do some jazz once we get the first notes out.
And then there will be time for questions.
Oh, there's going to be tons of time for questions. Don't worry about that. So I'm Jay Aronson. I'm actually a historian of science by training, which is kind of a random thing to be in a room like this. I started my thesis and first book was on the development of DNA identification in the American criminal legal system, and I was interested in rights in the context of the innocence movement and all that, but I hadn't really thought that much about the criminal legal system other than we need to figure out who's guilty and put them in jail and prevent innocent people from ending up in jail. A variety of kind of twists and turns. I ended up getting involved in human rights work, first identification of the missing after conflict and disaster. And then I'm at Carnegie Mellon. We have a big computer science community there. The people who I was talking to about death and about human rights issues, specifically trying to figure out how many people died in conflict, how many civilians died in conflict, we're increasingly getting videos that showed war crimes and human rights violations around the world. And they were like, hey, you're at Carnegie Mellon, can you help us figure out how to deal with all of these videos that we're getting? And I was like, I don't know the first thing about that when we asked. I get a group of people together who are doing really cool stuff for the government on video analysis and put together a group of people, human rights practitioners, scientists, all that. In the midst of this, I'm spending time watching the most horrific videos from conflict zones you could possibly imagine. And I'm also seeing videos of police killings and police brutality in the United States. In my human rights work, the goal is always to understand whether these events are systemic. Are these one-off events, or are they things that are happening regularly in a way that it's pretty clear that there is some kind of command structure that is ordering soldiers to do these things, or ordering people to do these things? Are they happening across the country or in one place? So you have singular events, and then you try and figure out how often they occur. And you build data sets and all of that stuff. I was, in 2017, I was at a conference, the International Association for Forensic Sciences, in Toronto, and I was giving a talk on my work on identification of the victims of the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks. Not so much because I'm interested in terrorism, but because I'm interested in how societies deal with mass death, with mass casualty events. There was a guy on the panel who was, at the time, the chief medical examiner of Washington, D.C., talking about his work developing a temporary disaster morgue. So there's a mass casualty event, and you need to very quickly set up a process for figuring out who these people are and what happened to them. It's Roger, to give you the punchline now. So we gave our talks. There was some other person. Roger and I still have no idea. We haven't figured it out and bothered to figure it out. And at the end of our talks, I said, hey, that was super interesting. Why didn't someone do that a long time ago? It kind of makes sense. It just seems kind of obvious. And he said, well, your talk was interesting. I know a lot of the people that you have worked with or that you were talking about in this talk. And then it was like, okay, nice guy, whatever. I'm about to walk away. And I said, Roger, I actually have a question for you. And I told him that I was trying to understand how common or rare these deaths in custody were. And I wanted to know where the government kept the data. Like, I know the government keeps track of how many people die in custody. These are people who are dying at the hands of the state. The federal government has an obligation to protect the basic fundamental human rights of its citizens. And so there was a database. I just wanted to know where it was so I could look at it. And he looks at me, and he smiles and kind of laughs and says, it's a long story and I'm hungry. Come have a drink with me, and I'll tell you what's going on here. It turns out that this is the thing that Roger had cared about most and had been passionate about most for over 20 years. And I asked him this question. And Roger's a man of God, I'm less so. We have different opinions about how this question, why this question got answered, or why this question got asked. But it turned into this book. So Roger says, come have a drink with me, buys me a couple of drinks, regales me with the story that's in the book, the stories that are in the book. And at the end of it, he says, we need to write a book about this, because I was asking him questions, and I was like, that can't make sense. And he said, let's write a book about this. And I was like, you don't just buy someone a few drinks and then write a book with them. That's not, I'm not that easy. That's not how this works. It's a little bit harder than that. So bottom line is, I said, okay, let's talk. And this is the product of that first conversation. And along the way, I was actually shocked and disturbed. And the stories that we tell in the book and what I learned have so fundamentally changed who I am as a person. Like, I can never go back to being the person that I was, partly because of what I learned and partly because of the friendship that I developed with Roger and the conversations that we had, like, at very random times during the pandemic about all of this. And it's been a life-changing experience for me. I will turn it over to Roger, and he can tell you a little about who he is and why me asking that question was either divine intervention or an amazing bit of coincidence. I'm going to leave it up to you to decide.
Y'all give him a round of applause. He definitely deserves that. I get chills every time you tell a story. I'm sitting here just, my hair is on fire, because I'm sitting in a room full of very smart people that want to hear about what we did and what we're doing, right? And so I'm from Jersey. Shout out to Jersey. Anybody from Jersey in the room? There's one person from Jersey won't act like that, because that's one of my best friends from high school, Richmond. So he's very welcome Jersey with his wife to be here. So thank you, brother, for being here. So I'm from Jersey, and I went to Howard undergrad, and left there, and I was the first black man in FBI laboratories. And so that was in 1996, 97. And I was in the DNA unit, and that was when, if you guys remember, that was when there was a big controversy about DNA processing, and they moved all of their agents out of the FBI laboratories and replaced them with scientists. And so I was one of the second group of scientists that came into the FBI to get the FBI accredited by ASCLD. By the major laboratory accreditation body, because it was unaccreditable, if that's a word, with having agents doing science. They needed true scientists, and so I was part of that group. I was taught by the late great Sam Bechtel. He's one of the fathers of the application of DNA in forensic science. But I got exposed to violence as a public health issue while I was there. Read David Satcher's Red Book on youth violence, and also got exposed to post-traumatic stress disorder. Not myself, but even though myself. But the concept that people that have seen trauma can be traumatized and then be violent. And I supported law enforcement at the time. I did EAP coordination, Employment Assistance Program, helped these agents get access to mental health after they discharge their weapon, right? So that they can go home and beat their wives or beat their husbands or drink alcohol, because when you take somebody else's life, that's not easy, right? So all of that came to this place where I said, I want to go to med school. I was pre-med undergrad, but I want to go to med school and I want to learn about violence as a public health issue. And I wanted to do it from the lens of the forensic pathologist when you do a medical examiner. And so I went to med school, and my first year of med school was February, 25 years ago. February, 25 years ago, so they're upcoming. And on February 3rd, I'm an emotional guy, so I may cry. February 3rd, 25 years ago, I can't do the math. 99. Amadou Diallo gets killed. So when you were around, Amadou Diallo was an immigrant from Africa. He was peddling small things, trinkets, because he was raising money so he could go to city college. So excited about his time. He had just raised enough money for his first semester. How do I know this? Because I'm friends with his mother. I'm talking to his mother. Shout out to Sean King. That's one of my good brothers in the back. He's my assistant. Yeah, you give him a round of applause. He put a lot of so we're meeting with Amadou Diallo this weekend, because we're open with the 25th anniversary of Amadou Diallo's, or commemoration of Amadou Diallo's killing. Well, I saw that in the news and it changed my life forever. We were the same age. And he was shot and killed. They shot at him 41 times. He was hit 19. He had entrance wounds in the soles of his feet. For the law students and the students, where was he? He was on his back, right? So that changed me forever. At that point, I said, man, if violence is a public health issue, and I'm learning that from the CDC and David Satcher's work, who was the Surgeon General at the time, then police violence must be a public health issue too. So I was one of the first to write on police violence as a public health issue in the Journal of the Student National Medical Association as a medical student 25 years ago. Shout out to the students that have an idea that want to write something now. You can change your whole trajectory and continue to fight. There are people that told me, oh man, we're going to give that up. You're going to become a pathologist. You're going to forget about all this. I haven't. So fast forward, I've been a medical examiner now for a long time. I've been an attending physician since 2006, 2007. Practiced all over the country, and was the last stint. I was the chief medical examiner in New Jersey, chief medical examiner. Now used to be in Washington D.C. Now I'm the chief medical officer for all adult ambulatory care for Howard University. 27 clinics, 110,000 patient visits a year. So I'm on the patient safety quality side of medicine now. But every day I'm doing death in custody work. So I am the medical director of the Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative, which is Colin Kaepernick's autopsy initiative. We do second autopsies for those individuals that die in and around the criminal legal system. So individuals that die at the hands of law enforcement or from natural suicide or accident within incarceration for free. Prison, Pennsylvania society. So those cases that family members, the loved ones, they die in your system in Pennsylvania, all you got to do is pick up the phone and say, hey, listen, the family wants the second autopsy. We have 7 forensic pathologists all over the country that perform these autopsies. Not free to them, right? It's free. Colin Kaepernick pays for it, right? And so these are about $7,500 a pop, right? And all of this is to make sure that you have a second opinion. Who would take a diagnosis of cancer and not go get a second opinion? If you're smart, you do, and you like the doctor that told you that you had cancer. Imagine if you didn't even know the doctor. Imagine the person that signed your death certificate wasn't even a doctor. Imagine if they ran for office and got elected to sign your death certificate. Imagine if they got signed your death certificate without autopsy and you didn't win. Imagine if you were the sheriff of the jail and then signed your death certificate when law enforcement killed you. You would want a second opinion. Under those circumstances, you would want a second opinion. And under the best circumstances. So we provide that second opinion as a function. This book is full of stories. There's one story that I'll tell throughout this conversation. Earl Faison changed my life as well. It happened around the same time. But this work of death in custody, this work that we're trying to do, these are not single individual tragedies. Although they're single individual tragedies. They are are a part of a system of deaths that are happening all over the country. And it's not just black folk. Let me just say that again, because people look at, people, you hear death in custody, first image come to your mind, black, white, rich or poor, you think it's a black man who's dying. The reality of it is that everyone's community is affected by the effects of the carceral system on the health of that individual. Right? So our job is we want to collect the data so we can decrease the burden of disease and injury of those that come into contact with this very filthy, disease-ridden, injury-creating system. Inherently it causes disease and injury. But yet we don't count the deaths that result from that disease or injury. So the book leads you down this path so that you can come to your own conclusion that we need to be able to approach this as a public health issue. Social justice issue, yes. Criminal justice or criminal legal issue, yes. But a public health issue. And I'll hand it over to Josh in a moment. The Centers for Disease Control is getting a pass. They're getting a pass. Your public health departments are getting a pass. They're standing behind their white coats. They're saying that's not our issue, but you count every single death in that jurisdiction, except for deaths in custody? No, we have the best vital registration system in the world. We need to put it to use and apply it to death in custody so we know the truth about this. That's the only way that we can begin solving this problem of death in custody. I have more to say, but I hand over to Josh. Thank you.
Just one thing really quickly. I think one of the things that shocked me was realizing, was realizing how deadly my own local jail is, the Allegheny County Jail. You think of deaths in custody, you think of like Big Bad Philly or Rikers or Chicago, Cook County. There have been 21 deaths in the Allegheny County Jail, little old Pittsburgh, 300,000 people in the city, 1.4 million people in the county since 2021. The reason we know that is because we had an incredible journalist named Brittany Heller, who Josh can tell you a little bit more about, who is a creative writer. She writes creative nonfiction. She was teaching writing in the jail, and someone died while she was teaching. And that freaked her out. And she was like, well, hold on. The students who I'm teaching in the jail could die? She hadn't thought about that because as professors, as teachers, we don't think of our students as people who can die because they're young and they're healthy and they have the future ahead of them. And that got her curious, and so she started looking. And she uncovered deaths that we would not know about if not for her. So the Allegheny County Jail is one of the deadliest jails in the country, not because the most people die there per population unit, whether it's the people who are there or the population of the county, but because Brittany knows the people inside and they tell her what's happening. And so I want to come back to one thing. I want to come back to how we start the book. But I wanted to give Josh some time to talk about the project that he did with Brittany, the work that he's done on deaths in custody. And I just wanted to shout Josh out as really one of the best journalists we have in this country. I'm not talking state or media or whatever. But the work that he does is absolutely incredible, and it's part of the constellation of things that have made it impossible for me to look away. Like, these deaths aren't happening to other people, by other people, in other people's names. They're happening in my name, in order to keep me safe. I am the person this system works on behalf of, and knowing how horrible and deadly it is, thanks to the work of Josh and Brittany and others, has made it impossible for me to look away. And I think that's part of the personal transformation that I've experienced as part of this project. So Josh, I'm just going to hand it over to you for a few minutes.
I appreciate that. That's probably far too kind, but I very much appreciate it. So my story is drastically less exciting than these two. My name is Josh Vaughn. I'm the investigative reporter for Penn Live, which is the newspaper in Harrisburg. I mean, my entrance into this topic really just comes because I'm perpetually curious. And I can say that give a shout out to Ethan Corey, who is former friend and former colleague at the Appeal. He's really the one who got the whole concept of these deaths not being counted on my radar with a great piece he did 2019-ish, okay, for the Appeal. And then I then started collecting as much data as I could during COVID, because my reporting prior to COVID had been about different aspects of the criminal legal system, rather than deaths. But obviously with COVID, it just amplified and raised that concern. So I started collecting as much data as I could, and then when I came to Penn Live, it was around the time that the DOJ put out its last, and at this point, potentially final report that they're going to put out on deaths in custody, on the county jails and state facilities. And I noticed that the data that I had from the state was drastically different and drastically lower than what had normally been reported in Pennsylvania. So in any given year, at least about 55 to 65 people die in county jails across the state. In 2020, there were only about 25 reported to the federal government. So less than half of the deaths that actually occurred in the jails were reported to the federal government as they were supposed to. So that got me onto this topic a bit, and I won't say that there's someone at this table who didn't return my phone call for comment for that story. What? You didn't return one? I tried. I didn't know.
Mike's coming up.
We invited you here, Josh, to promote your brand, and you start talking shit about it. I'm not going to invite you to dinner afterwards.
And he's over the park.
But no, I mean, we published that story back in 2022. And that really got me looking more at what was happening. I joined Penn Live in November of 2021, and started to hear stories about what was happening in the Dauphin County prison, which is our jail in Dauphin County. Allegheny County has had 21 deaths since 21. We've had 20 deaths since 2019, with a population, I think, about half or a third the size of Allegheny County. It's a significant number of deaths, and what we would hear is, the person died of a medical emergency, all this kind of stuff. And I luckily am in a job that I get to, the way that I put it is, I just get to be a professional pain in the ass to the county, and continually ask for records and not take no for an answer. And if I want to know more about what happened in this person, I'm going to keep pushing until I get answers. So I started looking into what was happening to those people, and I mean, it's every time I would get information into what happened to someone, it was, the official story is died of a medical emergency. Come to find out, the person was pepper sprayed, spit hooded, and put in a restraint chair minutes before he goes into cardiac arrest. That was never reported. Yeah, people who medical are standing over top of them, telling them that they're faking, and then 40 minutes later they're dead. Just on and on and on and on and on. And we obviously know then that these stories are also happening across the state. So in the beginning of this year, Brittany came to me and said that she wanted to develop a project that would develop a database of all the people who died in jails in Pennsylvania. So I'm like, sure, that sounds great.
And we got some funding from the Pulitzer Center, and then we spent probably the next 9 months digging up records, trying to find as many of the names and causes and manners of death for the people who died in jails. In 2022, there were at least 65 deaths in jails in Pennsylvania. That database is now public and available on Penn Live's website, and it's available on PINJ, Pittsburgh Institute of Nonprofit Journalism, which is Brittany's.
Was,
Yes. We lost Brittany to the Marshall Project in Ohio. So she's on to other things, but it's available there. The hopes are that the more we can get this out there, that the people who should be actually counting this, like it shouldn't be on academics, it shouldn't be on journalists. This is stuff that like the government should just do. These are human beings, regardless of why they're there, whatnot. They're human beings and they are dying, as Jay said, in our name, in our custody, and on our dollar. And if the humanity of it doesn't affect you, the amount of money that you're spending afterwards because the people are getting sued, it sure will affect you. Like, I mean, it's an issue that affects everyone. These are human beings, and it should not be happening. So I mean, that's been my work for the last couple years, and will continue to be work as long as Penn Live allows me, or until we, finally get something changed here in Pennsylvania.
thanks, Josh. So I'm going through my email. I'm going to find the email that we did not respond to, and then at the next public event that we're together, I'm going to say, this is Josh Vaughn. He didn't respond to my email on June 22nd, 2022 at 7:13 in the evening. So you just wait. I gave a talk at Drexel Law School this morning, and Roger and I have not done an event for a couple of months because of the holidays. And I was going through my notes, and I was going through the presentation, and I was like, am I forgetting things? I was almost gaslighting myself, like, how can this be? How can it be that there's actually a federal law? So we tell the story of the Death in Custody Reporting Act, the amazing work of Mike Masterson, a journalist, to get this thing passed, the efforts of people like Bobby Scott and Asa Hutchinson and Tim Hutchinson to get it on the books. We have a law that requires states to report deaths in custody, but for really bizarre bureaucratic reasons, at whatever 7 o'clock in the evening, after you've had a full day of work, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but the statistical agency within DOJ used to be the agency that collected the data. Because of just a crazy bureaucratic story, if you want to read about it, you can read about it, is no longer allowed to collect the data. And now it's being collected by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which grants money to organizations that are doing research and other things, and police agencies and all the rest. The Bureau of Justice Statistics is literally not allowed to walk across the hall to help BJA collect data. And now the states are like, we don't need to give the data to BJA, they don't know what the hell is going on. And like, I was going over that and I was like, is that really real? Like, am I misunderstanding something? It's just so perverse and fucked up, for lack of a better way of putting it. And it's like, it's super frustrating. And you would think that in a country like the United States, that's still a semi-functioning democracy, that has the best vital record system in the world, that we would know how many people die each year in the facilities and at the hands of the agencies that are supposed to be keeping us safe. But we don't. And the first conversation that I had with Roger was just, like, it was just so bizarre. I was like, how can this possibly be? Like, I almost didn't believe it. I thought he was kind of nuts when he was telling me some of the stuff he was telling me, but he's not. You're not, don't worry, you don't need to defend yourself. The one thing I wanted to say is that in the initial conversation that I had with Roger, 2 years in, he asks me a question. He's like, Jay, and I was like, yeah? And he's like, I want to know who the Ida B. Wellses of death in custody are. I want to know who's been pushing back against the ignorance, the official ignorance that we have in this country, that we just don't know how many people are dying. There are activists, there are lawyers, there are people like Claire and her colleagues at the Prison Society who are pushing back. And I was like, that's the weirdest question I've ever heard. Ida B. Wells was studying lynching, which was extrajudicial killing. And he said, no, it's the same thing. And I was like, it's not the same thing. And he said, yes, it is. And I kind of went away and I was like, okay, I'll find out who the Ida B. Wellses are. It's not the right question. And then, we were like, as we were beginning to think about the book, he was like, we need to start this book with lynching. And I was like, we don't need to start the book with lynching because that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the government, not extrajudicial. He's like, no, it's the same thing. And he was like, do your research, come back and tell me if you think I'm wrong. And I was like, okay, I'll go look into this. The book starts with lynching because it is the same damn thing, number one. And I'm a historian and I could talk about this for hours, but the one thing I'll say is that as lynchings are going down in this country, we know that thanks in part to the work of Ida B. Wells and the Tuskegee Institute and NAACP, the rise of racist policing, and more importantly, the rise of capital punishment. The government is beginning to take over the function of the lynchers, which is to keep Black people in their place in our society. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I really thought Roger was wrong. I really was like, we're not going to start a book about death in custody with lynching, and why would we start with Ida B. Wells? And so I just wanted to read a little bit. So the first chapter is called Lynching. So who was right, Roger or me? That was one of the many things that I learned as I got into this. So this is how the first chapter starts. If you haven't bought the book, hopefully this will encourage you to read, to want to read the book and buy it. A postcard captures the aftermath of the June 15, 1920 lynching of 3 young Black men in Duluth, Minnesota. Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGee had come to town as part of a traveling circus and were among several roustabouts accused of robbing a young white couple at gunpoint and then gang raping the woman. Although a doctor examined the young woman the next morning and found no evidence of rape, residents of Duluth were incensed. A large mob of hundreds, growing to thousands of white locals, there's newspaper estimates diverged widely, gathered at the police station that contained the city's jail. Armed with bricks, metal rails, and wooden beams, the mob stormed the station. I'm going to paraphrase. There were 6 Black men being held. For reasons that are unclear, the kangaroo court determined that Clayton, Jackson, and McGee were guilty, but not the 3 others. Everyone knew what was coming next. There was an attempt to stop the mob, but to no avail. The mob viciously beat the 3 men and hanged them on a light pole down the street from the police station. As depicted in the historical image captured on the postcard, thousands of white men, women, and children gleefully looked on while these men asphyxiated to death. Then I talk a bit more about all of this in this chapter. We talk about it. If it sounds familiar to you, this is the opening lines of Bob Dylan's Desolation Row. They're selling postcards of a hanging. 100 years later, and 150 miles south on Interstate 35, another extrajudicial killing of a Black man took place in Minnesota. This time, Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin served as the judge, the jury, and executioner. With uncanny calmness, Chauvin placed his knee on George Floyd's neck in full public view, and with other police officers looking on casually, bore down on Floyd for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The pressure on Floyd's airway and hypopharynx left him fighting for air and pleading for his life. He repeatedly told Chauvin that he could not breathe, and he even called out for his mother. Chauvin refused to release pressure, even as the crowd that had gathered at the scene shouted at him, and begged him to get off Floyd. While the murder weapon in this case was a knee rather than a rope, the result was the same: asphyxia due to neck compression, as was the manner of death, homicide.
You know, what's interesting, Jerry, when we read those, and we juxtapose the lynching and George Floyd's death, with that similar, if not same, cause and manner of death. We go in the book and we talk a lot about, in this lynching chapter, the role of the coroner during that time frame. And the coroners at that time frame were like the grand jury. So when a death like that happened, they would have to have a coroner's inquest. That coroner inquest would determine whether or not there's enough evidence to prosecute, enough evidence to establish cause and manner of death. The coroners in this country, and we have a whole chapter on the history of the coroners from England, those crowners that collected tax debt as their primary role, that turned to death investigators that came over in colonial America and did the same. They were death investigators, but tax collectors after death. But these coroners, during this antebellum lynching period, would take these cases and do these inquests. Hundreds of people at the base of the lynching. Even set up to eat, their children watching the lynching. Some even would take souvenirs: toes, fingers, ears, genitalia. People knew who they were. Body would go to the coroner, and the coroner's designation was death at the hands of unknown persons. Imagine, postcards made, people smiling, but yet we don't know how or who killed this individual. Death at the hands of unknown persons would functionally stop the death investigation there. No more investigation. Let's fast forward to Elijah McClain. 23-year-old man walking from the store, has a mask on, he's on the spectrum, has some autism. They try to stop him. He says, "Listen, I'm not doing anything." They drop him to the ground, they put him in a lateral neck hold, he goes unconscious. The whole time he's aspirating vomitus, he goes into more acidosis, his body is breaking down, he ends up almost dying, and then they give him a bolus of ketamine, which is twice the amount of what he would need if they thought he had what was called, and still called, excited delirium. The medical examiner and coroner in Aurora, Colorado, called Elijah McClain's case undetermined. Deaths at the hands of unknown persons. I get involved, prosecution gets me involved, I look over the case, I say that this is a case of a homicide, functionally. His position was asphyxia complicated by ketamine injection. I call it a homicide. The coroner changes their designation to the ketamine administration, but doesn't change the manner to homicide. Keeps the manner undetermined. Deaths at the hands of unknown persons. They tried four individuals, 3 law enforcement, 5 individuals. 3 law enforcement and 2 EMS providers. 1 law enforcement gets convicted, 2 of the EMS providers get convicted. One of the first times in U.S. history that EMS providers got convicted of a wrongful death, because they gave someone who was bound, handcuffed, twice the amount of ketamine to control him, and he wasn't even needing to be controlled. That level, this book is just really the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about the types of cases that understanding and being able to know those causes and manners of death and being able to see how they're distributed across the country and what the different causes and manners and the types of causes and manners that may even be covering up the true cause and manner. These are the types of things that if we have a checkbox on the U.S. standard death certificate to be able to start understanding these deaths, then we have the information that we need to start scrutinizing them as a collective and not as a single individual event.
So I want to turn things back over to Josh for a minute before opening it up for questions. But one thing I want everyone to understand is what excited delirium is, because this was yet another thing that just it screwed me up when I heard what it was. So how many of you have heard the term excited delirium? So a few of you. Okay. Excited delirium was invented in Miami in 1983. There were a series of black female prostitutes who were coming into the medical examiner's office dead. They had cocaine in their system, and they had evidence of sexual activity. There was a assistant ME there named Vincent DeMaio, who surmised that these women were overheating during sex with the male of their species while they were hopped up on cocaine. They were self-combusting. They were so excited that their bodies kind of burned up. Turns out that there was a serial killer who was drugging people. That's a different story. But excited delirium doesn't end there. It takes on a life of its own. Vincent DeMaio and his wife write a book. And Roger and I were doing a seminar at Duquesne a few months ago, and someone from Physicians for Human Rights was there, and she showed the dedication of the book. The book is dedicated to police officers and emergency medical service providers who had been wrongly accused of harming people who had died from excited delirium. That was the dedication of the book. So they write this book, and then they go across the country training police departments and police officers on how to recognize and deal with excited delirium. So this syndrome that started in prostitutes who got overheated from sex and cocaine becomes a thing that gets transposed onto black men who are resisting arrest, or who seem to be resisting arrest. They go all across the country. They help police officers, police organizations write policy on excited delirium, how to deal with it, basically absolving them from the deaths of people who die in interactions with law enforcement. Carnegie Mellon University, where I am, lists 4 policies on our website. 4 policies. The policy book is miles long. One of those policies is excited delirium, and I can't get them to take it off. You can be impressed. There's actually been progress on this one. So the American College of Emergency Physicians has recently rescinded its approval of excited delirium as an actual medical diagnosis. And the state of California has just passed a law a few weeks ago, actually, a couple months ago now, just before Christmas, that outlaws the use of excited delirium as a cause of death. But it's there, it's out there. If you go, I don't really recommend that you do this, but if you go and listen to the recording or watch the recordings of George Floyd being murdered, you hear the other police officer saying, "Oh, is this excited delirium? This is excited delirium. We need to watch out for excited delirium." You can hear them saying that. And this is happening in my name. I'm the beneficiary of this system. And I have to be mindful of that all the time. I wanted to pass it to Josh really quickly because this database that Josh has developed of jail deaths is incredible. Like, first of all, it's insane. And again, it was like, I was thinking like, okay, so Brittany and Josh, who are not extravagantly paid, who would probably be very excited to have some augmentation of their salaries to sort of pay for the amazing work they do. But they're the ones who are building databases of jail deaths in this state, in Pennsylvania, and it makes no sense. One of the things that Josh and Brittany discovered was that there are lots of deaths that get hidden. If it wasn't for Josh and Brittany, we would not know about them. And so I just wanted you to talk for a minute or two about some of the ways that jails actually hide deaths from us and how you figured out what they were doing.
Yeah, so I mean, as we kind of all understand, at least here, that jails and prisons are the places that we send people that we want to put out of sight, out of mind from society. You're literally putting people behind walls that you can't see them, it's very difficult to speak to them, and they're often forgotten. And with that comes a ton of, I guess the best way to put it is opaqueness, because everything that a jail does, there's some argument of their security. So we can't tell you this because security reasons. We can't give you this information, security reasons. And it's very hard for the public to kind of just get that information. The people who do have better access to that information tend to be the families, but then you're putting the onus on the people who are being harmed, who tend to have the least amount of power, or even know that they can go get this, or know that they were truly harmed in a way that should be rectified, to get the information out. So I mean, there is a whole, just to begin with, there's just a whole lot of, it's very difficult to get the records to find out who these people are to begin with, whenever they are officially, doing whatever reporting they have to do. As far as Dicker, the Dicker reports are just absolutely, I have loops of emails with BJA where it's like, well, this person wasn't reported. Well, we have to get it from an official source. Okay, who do I send it to get them to tell you that this person wasn't actually reported to the federal government like they were supposed to? Well, it has to go to this person. Then I go to the state agency. It's like, well, this person wasn't officially reported. Well, we reported everything that we got from this to BJA. BJA says we're in compliance, so oh well. And it's just loops. And that's for the people who are officially, the jail is willing to take some responsibility that person died. There's a whole, we have no idea how many. So anytime we talk about deaths in custody, and when we talk about the database, it's always at least 65 people died in jails in Pennsylvania last year, or 2022, because that we only know what we know. There is a loophole in our laws where it's no longer a death in custody if the person is no longer in custody at the moment that they die. So if you're in jail and you're found on death's door, and they can drag you out of the jail, get you to a hospital, get a judge to sign a release, get a judge to sign a bail modification, and you die hours, minutes, whatever it is later, you're no longer officially in custody. The jail no longer has a responsibility to report that death. And there's very little record of that you can get to show what's happening. So one of the things that we had to do was get 911 call response data to jails and start looking at, which are the ones that seem to be the most concerning. Can we start to narrow it down here? I had a 9-month fight with Dauphin County to get reports on who they're releasing while in the hospital. They had acute security concerns, had to take it to Office of Open Records, was a giant fight with the Office of Open Records. They finally relented and turned the records over to us. But I mean, there's this whole group of people who we have no idea what's happening to them, because they're finding this loophole in the law to say, well, they weren't in custody at the time. I mean, there was a guy in Center County back in 2020. He was found hanging in his cell it was like July 24th at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They get him to the hospital at 9 o'clock on the 25th. He's given a medical furlough. By 3 o'clock on the 25th, he's dead. The county argues that he wasn't in custody, and according to the lawyer, no one has died in Center County Jail over the last decade. So how many other people are like him? Not a clue. But we know there are more people out there. We find out about some of them through lawyers and the families that actually file a lawsuit, and we can find them that way. We've been able to get hospital releases, pry some of those out of the hands, 911 data. You wind up having to use all this proxy information where it should just be, this person, the reason that they're dead is what happened to them in jail. We should just know that. It should be reported. It should not be this game of, well, I don't want to tell that they actually died here. And the infuriating, the added infuriation of all this, there is no punishment if a jail has an excessive number of deaths. It's not like the federal government tends to come in and says, hey, you have a lot of deaths, so we're taking money away from you. Or the state comes in and says, we're taking money away from you, we're putting in a monitor here. There's literally no incentive other than it makes you look bad to not report this accurately and to get this information out there. BJA, as I've said on the podcast, I say a lot, BJA is allergic from using any of its enforcement mechanisms. I don't know if they've ever actually used an enforcement mechanism on any program that they operate. And the state, Pennsylvania, the state has absolutely zero. The DOC is supposed to collect this data, but there's no enforcement mechanism on the state level. The deaths in custody is one of the points that the state is supposed to collect that is carved out of any kind of enforcement mechanism within the DOC's oversight. So the data on their website literally just says, we collect it, we put it up, but we don't have any clue whether this data is accurate. So we are choosing not to count this. It's not like the jails are getting in trouble because they report more deaths. That's one of the things. Philadelphia, we have a general understanding or a better understanding of how many people are dying here because they tend to do a better job of actually reporting. But then you talk, you got Venango County, you've got Mercer County, you've got all these counties that are just all over the state that are tiny, that don't have immediate infrastructure. We know Allegheny County because of Brittany. They have immediate infrastructure and it wasn't doing its job. But you get Brittany in there, I mean, we find out more, but how many other places are these things happening that we don't know about because there isn't immediate infrastructure, we don't have the law saying they have to do it, and the jails are just deciding that they don't have to. So it's extremely difficult to get the information, especially as the public, from jails.
Great. So we're going to open it up to questions.